Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive landowner inherits a pristine lakeside property, he thinks he's found peace, until a powerful HOA declares quiet war. With forged maps, fake cops, and midnight invasions, one man must defend what's his, or lose everything to suburban greed. I've always believed in clear boundaries, on paper, on land, and in life. That's probably why I liked Utah. Wide skies, dry air, long views, and no one breathing down your neck. So when I inherited 12 acres of forested land near Hollow Rock State Lake, I saw it as more than just real estate. It was peace. It was legacy. And, most of all, it was mine. The southern side of the lake was always quiet. The northern bank, on the other hand, had been swallowed over the years by Vista Pines, one of those HOA-ridden enclaves full of luxury cabins squeezed elbow to elbow, all with matching beige trim and identical Adirondack chairs no one sat in. They had stone steps leading down to a jagged shoreline where HOA families would lay out their monogrammed towels like war flags and pretend the rocks didn't hurt their feet. But the southern side, soft sand, gradual slope, scattered pine shade. One old dirt road cut through my property and led right down to that slice of heaven. That road, once used by state rangers back when the South Bank was managed, was now my responsibility, and I kept it locked behind a solid steel gate, double-chained with 2 signs, private road and no public access. I didn't mind the occasional ranger, we had a system, but everyone else, no trespassing meant no trespassing. So imagine my mood when I stepped outside one Monday morning with my coffee, glanced down toward the main trail, and saw 3 figures standing just outside my gate. 1 woman, 2 men. The woman was in white slacks, blue blazer, the kind of outfit you wear to court, or a country club where someone's getting sued. She had that air. You know the one. Entitlement disguised as diplomacy. The taller of the 2 men had a clipboard. The other one wore a badge that said Vista Pines Security. Not a real badge, not a sheriff's star. More like something bought online that made him feel important. I put the coffee down on the porch rail and started walking. "Good morning," the woman called out, like she was about to offer me lemonade and a lawsuit. "I'm Karen Glenmont, president of the Vista Pines Homeowners Association. This is Trey Daniels, one of our members, and Marcus, our community safety liaison." I stopped 5 feet from the gate. I know who Trey is. He's my neighbor. And I know who I am, the guy who owns the land you're standing in front of. Karen's smile stiffened. "Yes, and that's exactly what we're here to discuss." Trey nodded. "Look, Steven, it's nothing aggressive. We just want to talk about access. It's been a topic in our community meetings for months now." Karen stepped forward, holding up a small plastic bag with a key inside. "We'd like you to provide us a working copy of the gate key. Nothing dramatic. Just to allow a handful of residents like Trey here convenient recreational access to the southern shore." I let the silence stretch. I looked at the key, then at her face, then at Trey. "You're asking me to unlock my private road," I said slowly, "for HOA members who don't live on this property, don't pay for its maintenance, and have no legal right to set foot past that sign." Karen didn't blink. "We believe that access to natural resources, like the lake, should not be obstructed by artificial barriers. You've closed off the only feasible path to the most usable part of the shoreline. That sets a dangerous precedent." I almost laughed. "Dangerous for who? HOA paddleboarders?" Trey cut in. "Come on, man. It's not like we're asking to camp out, just passage. My lot butts up against yours. It's the most logical route." "No," I said, and pulled my phone out to start recording. Karen's jaw tightened when she saw the red recording dot blink on the screen. Karen squared her shoulders. "We're not trying to start a conflict, mister." Caldwell, but refusing to cooperate on reasonable access could be interpreted as obstruction of a public interest. If this can't be resolved peacefully, we may have to escalate through the county. I encourage you to do just that," I said. "I'd love to see you explain to a judge how you're entitled to keys to private property you don't own, on land that's been in my family for over 70 years. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she smiled again. "We'll follow up in writing." "Please do," I said, already walking back toward my porch. My mailbox accepts delusions Monday through Friday. I watch them go. Karen stormed off first. Trey hesitated, looked like he wanted to say something else, but ended up just shaking his head. They disappeared behind the tree line, and I sat back down with my now cold coffee, watching the gate in silence. Something told me that wasn't the last I'd see of them. 2 hours later, just when I thought the morning circus was over, I heard tires crunching down the gravel. Not the usual sound of a delivery van or a ranger's pickup. This was heavier. I stepped out onto the porch and squinted down the drive just in time to see a black and white county cruiser pulling up, dust trailing behind it like a storm cloud. 2 officers got out. One was maybe in his 50s, tall, stocky, with a jaw that looked like it had been clenched since the Nixon administration. The other was younger, with slicked back hair and wraparound sunglasses, like he was auditioning for a cop show that would get canceled after one episode. The older one's nameplate read, Lieutenant Holloway. I stayed calm. Cops don't show up at random this far out unless someone sends them. I had a very strong suspicion who that someone might be. Afternoon, I said, stepping down the porch steps and keeping my hands where they could see them. Something I can help you gentlemen with. Lieutenant Holloway pulled a small folder from under his arm. Sir, we're responding to a report filed earlier today regarding an obstruction of public access to Hollow Rock Lake. I almost laughed. You're joking. I assure you I'm not. He handed me a copy of a formal complaint, HOA letterhead, filed and stamped. They were fast. It states that a private landowner has installed a locked gate across what may be considered a shared access corridor to a public resource, Holloway continued. And let me guess, I said, already pulling out my phone to bring up the digital copies of my deed and cadastral overlay. You're here to take a look and make sure I'm not hiding a drawbridge and a dragon on my dirt road. The younger officer gave a tiny smirk. Holloway didn't. I opened the deed on my phone. This is Parcel 74 Alpha, owned by my grandfather since 1953. This road, I pointed to the overlay, cuts directly through my property. It's never been a public easement, never been part of any county-maintained route. It was a ranger access trail, long defunct and reassigned in property records when the Park Service retreated from the southern shore in the 80s. I have the full history if you'd like to see it. Holloway didn't even look. He flipped through his own folder and said, we also have a statement from the Vista Pines HOA, indicating that a recent county map revision shows this corridor as falling under joint access, pending review by the County Zoning Commission. Pending doesn't mean approved, I said. And that map revision is fraudulent. I've already filed a complaint about that exact change because it was submitted by a private firm with family ties to the HOA president. The younger cop raised an eyebrow. That true? Yep. Glenmont Surveying, owned by Karen Glenmont's brother. Funny coincidence, right? Holloway sighed through his nose and glanced toward the gate. Regardless, we're required to perform due diligence. I'm going to have to ask if you'll hand over a key to the gate so we can assess whether access is being unlawfully restricted. I stared at him. You're not serious. I am. I took a slow step back. Lieutenant, if you try to take that key without a warrant or a court order, we're going to have a very different kind of situation on our hands. The younger cop shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should call in the zoning liaison first. Holloway cut him off. Sir, I'm asking for voluntary compliance. And I'm saying no. Not without legal grounds. You want to assess the area? That's fine. You can do it from the public road with binoculars like the HOA does every weekend. But that gate stays shut unless you bring me a signed order from a judge. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded letter from my attorney. This is a cease and desist directed at the HOA. It includes a preliminary injunction filed this morning. We're seeking a temporary restraining order on HOA members and affiliates attempting access to or modification of my property. I suggest you read it. Holloway didn't take it. He looked at the paper like it might give him heartburn. This is an active investigation. We'll be back. Bring a warrant next time, I said, already backing toward the house. And maybe read the Fourth Amendment on the way. They left without another word, the cruiser throwing up a fresh wave of dust as it pulled out. As soon as they were out of view, I opened my security app and downloaded the body cam footage and audio from my property cams, backed it up to 2 drives, and forwarded a copy to my lawyer. Then I poured myself a second cup of coffee, decaf this time. My hands were already shaking. By the next morning, my lawyer, Rachel Mendez, was already 2 cups deep into the strongest coffee Salt Lake City could offer, and forwarding me a PDF marked emergency motion for protective injunction. She called me around 8, her voice sharp and efficient as ever. "Stephen, that HOA just stepped into felony territory," she said. "We're filing in district court within the hour. You'll have temporary legal protection from further encroachment while we dig into the map situation." "The map?" I repeated. "You mean the one Holloway waved around like gospel?" "Exactly. That version isn't even posted on the county's official GIS portal. It was uploaded as an external contribution to the Planning Review Board. Unverified, but someone's already acting on it like it's law. I didn't have to ask who. Karen Glenmont's brother still runs Glenmont Surveying." "Yup," Rachel confirmed. Their last contract with Vista Pines was for lot parceling back in 1929. "I just pulled it." That afternoon, I met a licensed geodetic surveyor named Eric Mahoney, a short-bearded guy who looked more like a bluegrass banjo player than a man who could dismantle a property fraud in under an hour. He arrived with a drone, a rolled-up aerial LiDAR map, and a look of quiet enthusiasm like this was his version of a murder mystery dinner party. "The gate's yours, no question," he said less than 15 minutes in, walking the line with his GPS pole while his drone zipped overhead. "This road's been carved into your land since before the HOA even existed. Any claim of public easement would have had to go through a formalized right-of-way process. And no such process exists," I said. "Correct. But what's interesting..." He tapped on his tablet and showed me 2 map layers, one dated 5 years ago, the other uploaded just last month. "See this line?" He drew a red mark through my lower acreage. "That's new. And it's off by about 92 feet from the original boundary line. That's not a mapping error. That's someone deliberately shifting lot lines." He looked at me with a raised brow. "That's fraud." I took a deep breath, watching the drone hover near the tree line. "How hard is it to prove in court?" "With this data," he grinned, "like proving water is wet." We spent the rest of the day walking the road, photographing the original steel markers embedded in the soil by the state decades ago, and comparing them to the revised positions shown in the HOA's map. Rachel called later to say our emergency motion had been granted. The judge had approved a temporary stay on any further action or enforcement attempts regarding my land. HOA couldn't touch a blade of grass without risking contempt. Still, it didn't end there. That night, I got a text from my neighbor Mike, who lived down the hill in the direction opposite the HOA. Good guy, ex-firefighter, not one for gossip, unless something smelled like gasoline. "Check next door," the text said. "Karen's stirring the pot." I opened the app. There it was, posted by someone named VP Community Voice, which I knew damn well was Karen in digital drag. The post read, "Important, local lakefront access is being unfairly restricted by one private landowner, despite Vista Pines' efforts to cooperate. We've submitted maps to the county, proving shared access corridors exist. Please voice your support for our recreational rights." There were dozens of comments, some HOA members cheerleading the cause, others talking about organizing a peaceful demonstration. One person suggested walking the route anyway to test the boundary claims. Trey chimed in, "I just want to paddleboard with my kids without drama." This is being blown out of proportion. The next day, I installed 2 more motion-activated trail cameras, one aimed at the back road, one pointed down toward the south tree line. I wasn't taking chances. Rachel, meanwhile, was already preparing the first formal fraud complaint against Glenmont Surveying. Eric agreed to sign on as an expert witness. We had timelines, GPS overlays, original deeds, drone footage, soil markers, and court-verified cadastral data. It was airtight. And yet, the air didn't feel clear. Something told me we were only at the start of the storm. I thought the temporary injunction might buy me some peace. Turns out, it just made them angrier. 3 days after the ruling came down, I found a man I didn't recognize parked on the shoulder near the trailhead, leaning on his rental SUV with a clipboard and a camera. When I approached, he introduced himself as a Vista Pines consultant conducting community access documentation. I told him in plain English that if he took one more step past my fence line, I'd personally make sure that clipboard got subpoenaed. He left, but not before snapping a wide-angle shot of my gate like it was the Zapruder film. Rachel wasn't surprised. "They're panicking," she said. "We just filed the fraud complaint against Glenmont Surveying, and I submitted Mahoney's survey findings as supplemental evidence. You kicked a very polished hornet's nest." The hearing was set for Monday. Not the fraud suit yet, just a procedural fight over the injunction. A judge would decide whether it should be extended until we went to trial, or whether Vista Pines could continue to try slithering through any legal gray zones they could find. It wasn't a full-on war yet, but it was the first official battle. I wore a pressed shirt. Rachel wore war paint. Karen showed up in court like a real estate agent cosplaying as a martyr. White dress, pearl earrings, and a giant binder clutched to her chest like the 10 Commandments of entitlement. Her attorney, a guy named Raymond Beck, had the slicked-back look of someone who billed by the syllable. Their argument was as bloated as I expected. Beck claimed that the HOA had acted in good faith based on updated geographic data showing that the Southern Road had historically been part of an access corridor intended for eventual community use. He cited obscure state park easement, guidelines, misquoted county recreational ordinances, and even tried to argue environmental equity, as if HOA members had a constitutional right to suntan near my fire pit. Rachel took it apart like a professional mechanic ripping open a lemon of a used car. She showed the time-stamped GIS data from the county server. She laid out the survey overlays. She displayed Glenmont's registration as a private entity, not a government contractor, and noted the blatant conflict of interest with Karen. Then she dropped the bomb, a notarized affidavit from a former HOA board member named Glenn Raithman. Apparently, Glenn had resigned last year after pushing back on what he described as coercive and legally dubious strategies to gain private shoreline access through non-HOA properties. Rachel read directly from the affidavit. At one meeting, Karen, Glenmont stated, and I quote, "We'll redraw the damn maps ourselves if we have to. Nobody's gate should keep us from our own lake." You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Karen's face turned the color of undercooked pork. The judge didn't need long. She granted an extension of the injunction, effective until trial, and issued a warning that any further attempts by the HOA or its affiliates to initiate access by force, misrepresentation, or interference would result in contempt proceedings and possible criminal referral. Karen tried to follow us out of the building. "Stephen, this isn't personal," she hissed, walking behind me like a mosquito in heels. "You're making this so much bigger than it needs to be." I stopped, turned, looked her dead in the eye. "You forged a map to steal land that doesn't belong to you," I said, then sent cops to my door to intimidate me into giving it up. "You made it personal." She opened her mouth, probably to unleash some HOA-flavored venom, but Rachel stepped between us like a bouncer. "We're done here," she said coolly. Later that evening, I got a voicemail from a reporter with the Salt Lake Herald. Apparently someone had leaked the story of the map fraud complaint and the court showdown. He asked if I wanted to comment. I didn't call back. I was too busy replacing the lock on my gate, again, this time with a model used on secure federal research sites. It wasn't over, not even close, and I didn't plan on blinking first. It was the sound that woke me first. A distant metallic clang, subtle but sharp enough to slice through the mountain silence outside my bedroom window. I sat up, eyes adjusting in the dim light, and reached for the tablet on my nightstand. One swipe, and my property cam feed came to life. What I saw made my jaw tighten. The gate was wide open. It had been cut. Again. One of the chains lay coiled in the dirt like a dead snake. The lock was nowhere in sight. And someone had installed a temporary orange plastic barrier across the trail with reflective tape and a stenciled sign reading HOA Recreational Access Route, authorized entry only. I was out of bed, dressed, and booted in under 2 minutes. I grabbed my flashlight, a camera, and the Glock I kept locked in the safe for reasons exactly like this. I didn't plan on using it, but I also wasn't walking into a midnight invasion unarmed. When I reached the clearing near the trailhead, I counted 4 vehicles parked casually along the edge of my land. SUVs, all with Vista Pines community decals on their bumpers. 2 of them even had laminated HOA pass tags hanging from their mirrors like this was some kind of sanctioned field trip. I didn't see anyone around immediately, but I could hear faint voices and the unmistakable pop of a beer tab somewhere down near the waterline, my shore. I took a few wide-angle photos, zoomed in on license plates, then marched straight back to the house. My adrenaline was already peaking, but I kept my hands steady as I called the county sheriff's office. Not the precinct where Holloway and his HOA buddies operated, but the outer district line. The dispatcher was refreshingly professional. Within 15 minutes, a different patrol unit, Deputy Laura Hines and Deputy Ron Grant, rolled up in a muddy cruiser and stepped out looking alert, not annoyed. I met them halfway down the trail. "You're going to want your body cams running for this," I said, handing over a flash drive. "Here's the footage from the gate this morning, plus my court injunction. You're standing on private property. Everything beyond that tree line is mine. Those cars belong to HOA members. That plastic barricade is new, and there are currently unknown persons trespassing down by the lake. They didn't ask stupid questions." Hines clicked her cam on. "We'll handle it." They moved with purpose, checking the parked vehicles, inspecting the fake barrier, and radioing in for confirmation on the restraining order. I stood back and recorded from my own phone. 15 minutes later, the deputies returned, this time escorting 5 individuals up from the shoreline, all looking like kids caught sneaking into a drive-in movie. One of them, naturally, was Trey Daniels, in cargo shorts and flip-flops, carrying a folding chair and a thermos. Hines asked him point blank, "Did you receive permission from the landowner to enter?" Trey had the nerve to smirk. "Karen said it was taken care of." "Did you verify that with any county authority?" "No, but she said she cleared it with the commission," he said, clearly realizing mid-sentence how dumb it sounded. They were separated for statements. I watched as Grant bagged the laminated HOA access passes as evidence. One of the women in the group claimed they were under the impression this was a public shoreline due to the new signage. Hines didn't even flinch. She just calmly asked if they could produce any legal document backing that claim. Of course, they couldn't. As the group was escorted off the property, Hines turned back to me. "You'll want to press charges," she said quietly. "At least for criminal trespass and illegal entry. These fake documents may even constitute forgery. We'll be submitting them for review." "Absolutely," I said. "And check the sign. Bet you a coffee it was printed by the same vendor that does HOA newsletters." That night, I emailed Rachel everything. Photos, badge numbers, audio logs, body cam timestamps. By morning, she'd already drafted an amended filing, adding new counts: attempted fraud, criminal trespass, forgery, and contempt of court. And then came the cherry on top. As I was reviewing overnight footage, one frame stood out. A man in a Vista Pine security jacket, not HOA member, not a resident, recorded clearly slicing the lock and unrolling the plastic barrier with help from another guy in cargo pants and a ball cap. The camera caught both of their faces. One of them was Marcus, the community liaison who'd shown up with Karen during our first confrontation. The other, Lieutenant Holloway's son, according to Rachel's PI contact. The next move wasn't mine. It belonged to the prosecutor's office. By the time Monday rolled around, my inbox was a war zone. Rachel had copied me on every update. New filings submitted, subpoenas issued, interviews scheduled with both deputies Hines and Grant. One by one, the dominoes were lining up. And Karen Glenmont was standing at the head of the table with a smug smile and a gasoline can. Then, just after lunch, Rachel called. "You sitting down?" she asked, her tone light in that dangerous way that always meant something big was about to happen. "Go for it." The county attorney's office just greenlit an investigation into Glenmont surveying. Your geodetic friend Mahoney? He filed an official complaint through the Utah Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. And guess who shows up on the incorporation papers? Let me guess. Someone whose name rhymes with Schmarin. Close. Her brother, Darren Glenmont. And get this, he's got 2 prior ethics violations already, both involving unauthorized lot line adjustments. And one of those cases was quietly dismissed after a witness changed their story. I let that sink in. So Karen's not just a HOA tyrant. She's running a side hustle with a family fraud ring? Looks like. And Mahoney's analysis showed the latest Vista Pines map submission, where they tried to relocate your gate by 30 feet, was altered digitally after the original file had been notarized. Forgery. Exactly. And here's the kicker. The digital signature on the final upload was traced to an IP address inside the HOA's management office. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Karen was probably hosting a wine tasting on a deck she claimed was built within setback limits. Meanwhile, the net was closing in. That evening, a county investigator came by the house to review the original gate footage, map overlays, and our log of trespassing events. He stayed for nearly 2 hours asking detailed questions, not just about the land and the signs, but about the pattern, the escalation, the use of fake authority. the involvement of law enforcement. He seemed particularly interested in the footage showing Marcus, the HOA's so-called security consultant, slicing through the lock with bolt cutters and rolling out the fake access banner. "Has he ever identified himself as law enforcement?" the investigator asked. "No," I said, "but he wears a uniform that looks close. Badges, shoulder patch, radios. Anyone ever assume he was a cop?" "Once. A couple from Salt Lake pulled up in June, thought he was doing a state park inspection. He never corrected them. That was enough." The investigator left with copies of everything and a promise that this was now being elevated to a multi-agency inquiry, including county fraud, unlawful impersonation, and possible civil rights violations due to misuse of authority. By the end of the week, we got the news. A warrant had been issued for Marcus the Enforcer, charging him with criminal impersonation, destruction of private property, and unlawful entry. And then, the breaking point. I woke up to an email from Rachel. Subject line, "Holy." Hell attached was a screenshot of an internal HOA memo that had leaked onto a local whistleblower blog. It was labeled Strategic Community Expansion Opportunities, Phase 2. In it, Vista Pines board members openly discussed using the Southern Access Route, my road, as a shared infrastructure opportunity that could be leveraged by asserting historical utility precedent and selective enforcement of local ordinances via allied enforcement liaisons. Translation? They planned to steal my road, then pressure the county into backing them up. And that phrase, allied enforcement liaisons, was underlined. I felt sick, angry, and vindicated. We weren't fighting HOA overreach anymore. We were fighting a coordinated attempt at land theft, map forgery, impersonation of authority, and collusion with law enforcement. Rachel filed for an emergency evidentiary hearing, not just to protect my property, but to expose the whole rotten operation. It was no longer about access. This was about taking down the entire web. The emergency hearing was set for Wednesday morning. By Tuesday night, my driveway looked like a media staging area. Someone had leaked the story. Maybe the whistleblower blog, maybe Rachel's legal team, maybe one of the fired cops trying to get ahead of the avalanche. Either way, reporters were camped outside with cameras, hoping to get footage of the man who stopped the HOA land grab. I wasn't interested in interviews. I was focused on locking everything down. I spent the evening rechecking camera feeds, backing up footage, and walking the perimeter of the gate. This time, there were 3 locks, reinforced steel brackets, and a motion sensor floodlight mounted high in the tree canopy. I even added a face recognition camera that pinged my phone if someone got too close without authorization. But it didn't matter, because that night, they tried again. At 3:28 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. Gate perimeter breach. Multiple subjects detected. I bolted upright, heart racing, pulled up the live cam, and there they were. 3 figures, 2 with headlamps, 1 holding a bolt cutter, working in near silence like amateurs trying to stage a heist. One of them planted another temporary sign, this one laminated with the Vista Pines HOA seal. It read, Community Emergency Access Corridor, under temporary easement authority. It was laughably fake, but not harmless. Because behind them, a full van load of people began to arrive, parking just outside the tree line and walking in with towels, coolers, beach chairs, as if this were an official HOA beach day. At 4 in the morning, that was it. I called the real sheriff's department and activated my emergency drone. The quadcopter zipped into the night sky and gave me a bird's eye view. It confirmed everything. Over 12 people now on my land, trespassing and openly violating the restraining order. Someone even lit a campfire. By the time Deputies Hines and Grant arrived 20 minutes later, I'd already emailed Rachel, the prosecutor's office, and our court clerk. The deputies were shocked, not just by the crowd, but by the organization of it. Pre-printed passes, safety vests, a clipboard with event check-in. It was as if HOA had declared eminent domain by sheer audacity. And then came the moment that cracked it all wide open. As Hines approached the organizer at the scene, a man in a golf hat and HOA polo shirt, he handed her a printed packet of temporary authorization permits, signed by Lieutenant Holloway, the very same officer now under suspension and being investigated for prior misconduct in my case. Rachel, once she received the scanned permit, almost lost her mind. "This isn't just fake, it's a felony," she said over the phone. The man signed a forged easement order. That's not only impersonation of public authority, it's abuse of power while under active investigation. Hines didn't wait. Within the hour, 3 arrests were made on the spot. 2 for trespassing and 1 for criminal conspiracy to defraud. The fake permit was taken as evidence. The event log clipboard, bagged. The drone footage, transferred to county evidence systems. The media, now fully awake, showed up to record the tail end of it all. Patrol cars escorting HOA members off my property in their flip-flops and sun hats. Karen nowhere to be seen. But she wasn't hiding. She was sitting in a deposition. And she didn't know that while she sipped bottled water and delivered prepped statements to her lawyer, her signature had just appeared on 5 different forged access forms, one of which matched the document found at my gate. And every one of them had a date stamp after the court had already barred her from approaching my land. The trap was closing. The hearing room was colder than I expected. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was just the weight of everything. Rachel sat beside me, a calm storm in a navy suit, flipping through a thick folder of evidence like a surgeon prepping for the final incision. Across from us sat Karen Glenmont, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her smile was gone. She stared straight ahead, hands folded tightly in her lap. The mask had cracked. The judge called the session to order. What followed wasn't a courtroom drama. It was a surgical dissection. Rachel led the charge. A chronological breakdown of every unauthorized HOA incursion. Video evidence showing Karen and her enforcers trespassing, slicing locks, planting fake signage. A certified report from geodetic engineer Mahoney confirming the altered property lines and matching them against the forged HOA maps. Screenshots of the HOA's internal memo clearly identifying plans to use my land as shared infrastructure. Witness testimony from the couple who mistook Marcus for a state official. Copies of the fake temporary access permits, all bearing signatures traced back to a suspended lieutenant, now under criminal indictment. And finally, proof that Karen had signed off on at least 5 forged entry passes after the court had issued a no-contact ruling. When it was the HOA's turn, their defense team stumbled through procedural noise, community benefit, historic ambiguity, misunderstanding of access law. The judge didn't bite. He called for a recess. When he returned, the ruling was swift. He declared that the road, gates, and entire perimeter leading to the lake from the south were undeniably private land, backed by historical deed, GPS-based cadastral overlay, and decades of exclusive usage. Then came the real blow. Karen Glenmont was found in contempt of court for violating the restraining order. The fake permits signed under her name were deemed felony-grade forgeries. She was remanded into custody right there in the courtroom. Her attorneys didn't even object. One of them silently gathered her purse. But it wasn't just her. The judge ordered a full audit of the Vista Pines HOA. Several board members faced individual lawsuits from other residents who now realized they too had been coerced or manipulated. One by one, the dominoes fell. 2 deputies were already under internal affairs investigation. Marcus, the fake security consultant, had been charged with impersonating law enforcement, destruction of private property, and unlawful surveillance. He'd apparently installed trail cameras on my land, aimed at the gate. Those were seized and added to the evidence stack. When it came to me, the judge didn't hold back. He awarded full legal confirmation of land ownership, an injunction prohibiting any member of Vista Pines HOA from coming within 300 feet of my property line, and a financial judgment, $680,000 in damages for legal expenses, emotional distress, destruction of property, and repeated invasion of privacy. Rachel squeezed my arm. You just set a precedent. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because I finally had the quiet to think, the kind of peace that settles in only when the wolves are gone. By the weekend, I'd replaced the gate, reinforced steel core, dual padlocks, motion lights, face recognition camera mounted higher than any bolt cutter could reach, and one new addition. A handmade metal sign, laser-etched and powder-coated to withstand the Utah sun. It read, "This is not your shortcut. Private land. Trespassers will be jailed." Beneath that, in smaller print, ask Karen Glenmont how that worked out.